Ava Brooks stood in the small apartment, the glow of her phone casting a pale light across the dim room. She could hear the steady hum of the refrigerator, the soft murmur of rain against the window, ordinary sounds in a world that felt anything but. But now, in the quiet stillness of the night, her attention was fixed entirely on the screen in her hand. Harbor was only phase 1. The words lingered in the air, cold and cryptic. The message was short, a jolt of tension running through her body as she read it again. Her heart skipped. Who sent this? The answer came almost immediately. Someone's watching. Watching her. Watching Harbor. The building project. The one she had put everything into. The one that had taken over every waking moment of her life. Ava's fingers trembled as she set the phone down on the counter, the glow from the screen casting sharp shadows across her face. The weight of the message pressed down on her chest. Phase 1. It sounded like a warning, like someone knew something she didn't. A chill ran down her spine as she glanced around the room, half expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. But of course, the apartment was empty. She swallowed hard and quickly dialed Elias. It rang once, twice. Then his calm voice answered, a tone that had always been the anchor to her fraying nerves. Ava, he said softly. You okay? Her breath caught in her throat for a moment. There was no easy way to say this, not when every part of her body wanted to ignore it. Pretend it wasn't real. Elias, she said. Her voice quiet but firm. I just got a message. Someone sent me a warning. They said Harbor was only phase 1. There was a long silence on the other end. Ava could hear his breath controlled, as always before he finally spoke again. You're sure it's not a prank? Ava shook her head, though he couldn't see it. It's not. I've never seen anything like it before. Another pause. This one felt heavier, longer, as if Elias were weighing his next words carefully. All right, he said, his voice now colder. I'll be there in 10. She didn't protest. She knew what needed to be done. When Elias arrived, he found her pacing in the small kitchen, her hands pressed against the counter, her eyes darting from the window to the phone. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought. He hesitated at the door, his presence filling the small space with an energy she hadn't realized she was craving. Ava, he said, his voice sharp but full of an underlying concern. She turned to him, her expression tense. Elias, I don't understand what's going on. Who would send a message like that? What does it mean? Phase 1. What are they planning? He stepped closer, his gaze scanning her face, searching for any sign of vulnerability. But she hid it well. Always had. He knew she was strong. But this was different. This was fear, a quiet, insidious thing creeping into her thoughts. Let me see the message. Ava handed him the phone, her hand brushing against his. A spark, brief but undeniable, shot through her at the contact. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing as he read the cryptic message. Phase 1, he repeated softly. This isn't a joke. And someone's sending a message. His voice, though calm, held an edge of uncertainty. We need to dig deeper into this. Ava. He handed the phone back to her, but she didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, she let the phone rest on the counter, staring at it as if waiting for some kind of answer to reveal itself. I'm scared. Elias, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time she had said those words aloud to anyone. His expression softened. He took a step closer, standing beside her now. Their proximity too close, too intimate for the words they were sharing. You don't have to be afraid. We'll figure this out. We always do, he said, his tone so steady, so reassuring. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling in her chest, the hollow pit that had formed ever since she'd seen that message. There was something bigger than this project, something darker, waiting just around the corner. Ava's mind raced. What could it be? The silence in the room was filled with the weight of what was unsaid. A storm was coming, one that had nothing to do with the weather outside, but with the world they had built together and apart around Harbor. They were both entangled in this project, bound by responsibility. Yet this new threat felt personal. Ava reached for her phone, the cool screen lighting up her face as she pulled up Harbor's files, contracts, names of contractors, project timelines, and she began searching for any clue that could explain the message. Elias stood beside her, his presence steady, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders. His silence spoke volumes. He was just as uncertain as she was, but he was better at hiding it. As they sifted through the paperwork, the hours slipped by unnoticed. She didn't realize how close they were until she felt the warmth of his arm brushing against hers. Every so often, their hands would touch the briefest of contacts, but each one sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just the pressure of the work or the looming threat. It was something deeper. Elias shifted slightly, his shoulder grazing hers as he leaned closer to view the next document. Ava tried to focus on the task at hand, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him, his quiet strength, the way he stood beside her in the midst of chaos. Was this what it felt like to be cared for? Got something, Elias said suddenly, breaking the silence between them. His voice was urgent, his eyes sharp. He had found a discrepancy in one of the contractor's invoices, something that didn't add up. Ava's heart skipped. Is this it? Could this be the reason for the message? He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. It's a start. Ava exhaled, relief flooding her system. But just as quickly, a new wave of anxiety washed over her. The feeling wasn't gone, only delayed. They were on to something. But this was just the beginning. And she could sense, deep in her bones, that the message wasn't just a warning about the project. It was a warning about something else, something more personal. She turned to Elias, her gaze locking with his. I don't think it's just the project they're after. It's something bigger, something more dangerous. Elias didn't reply immediately. He simply looked at her, his face unreadable. The flicker of something familiar passed between them. Ava couldn't place it. But in that moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just for the project, but for something else, something she hadn't yet named. The sound of rain against the window grew louder, heavier, almost like a warning in itself. But Ava couldn't look away from Elias. The space between them was charged now, not just with tension, but with an unspoken understanding. He stepped closer, just a fraction. We're in this together, Ava, he said softly. We'll find out who's behind this, together. Ava felt her pulse quicken. Together, she whispered, as though the word itself could ground them in the storm that was coming. The night stretched on, the city outside blurred by the rain, but inside that small apartment, amid the glowing screens and papers scattered across the table, the real danger wasn't just the project or the message, it was the way they had come together, pulled in by something neither of them could deny, and neither of them knew it yet. But this was the beginning of something far bigger than any business deal. The rain came down in heavy sheets, soaking the streets and turning them into a shimmering, slippery river of reflections. Ava's footsteps splashed softly as she hurried along the sidewalk, her coat clinging to her skin, the weight of the harbor files in her bag almost forgotten for the moment. She had made sure Leo was settled for the night, double-checked the medication for his fever, and checked her phone one last time before leaving the office. The message still loomed in her mind. Harbor was only phase 1. Every step she took felt heavier, and the uncertainty gnawed at her insides like a slow poison. She couldn't shake the feeling that the message wasn't just about the project. It was about something much more dangerous, and something more personal. She tried to push it aside, focusing on getting home, but her mind wouldn't let go. The world outside felt as stormy and disorienting as the one inside her. She turned a corner, barely noticing the splash of rain as it hit the sidewalk, when a car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down slowly, and she froze. There he was, Elias. His face was partially obscured by the rain-drenched window, but she could see the dark circles under his eyes, the exhaustion etched into his jawline. He was wearing his coat, but the rain had already soaked it through, making it cling to his broad shoulders. He looked weary, like the world had been bearing down on him, just as it had on her. "Need a ride?" His voice, though calm, was layered with concern. Ava hesitated for only a moment. She had almost convinced herself she preferred to walk, to take the solitude of the rain as a companion for her thoughts. But there was something about the way he looked at her, something she couldn't explain, that made the decision for her. She nodded silently, stepping toward the car, feeling a strange sense of comfort as she climbed into the passenger seat. Elias didn't speak at first. He started the engine, and the car rolled silently into the night, moving through the misty streets of Seattle. The headlights painted the wet pavement in sharp strokes, the reflections dancing like ghosts of forgotten things. Outside, the world felt both muted and vast, like they were the only two people in a city of endless gray. Ava sat beside him, staring out of the window, trying to ignore the weight of the message still buzzing in the back of her mind. Her fingers gripped the edge of her coat, tight enough to feel the fabric strain. She was fighting a losing battle. She couldn't keep her thoughts at bay. She had been so focused on the project, the future, the endless numbers and meetings, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel what was building inside her. It wasn't just about the work. It was about him, about Elias. The car turned a corner sharply, and Elias glanced over at her, his eyes momentarily meeting hers. A flicker of something passed between them, but he quickly looked away. Ava's heart skipped a beat. His eyes were unreadable, but the weight of his gaze made her wonder, did he feel it too? The silence stretched out, thick with things unsaid. "You're quiet tonight," Elias finally said, breaking the stillness. His voice was softer than usual, more introspective. It sent a ripple through her chest. Ava turned toward him, her breath catching for a moment. She could feel the warmth of his presence next to her, even as the rain beat against the windows, like a warning. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her thoughts felt like a tangled mess she couldn't make sense of. "There's just too much happening, too many things I don't understand. And that message." Her fingers clenched around her bag, feeling the coolness of the papers inside. She didn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the reaction in his eyes. Elias remained quiet for a moment, his focus on the road ahead. The car turned again, gliding over the slick streets, but Ava felt the car slowing. His gaze lingered on her for a second longer than necessary before he spoke. "I'm not asking you to explain everything," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I want you to know, whatever's going on, you're not alone in this. You've got me." Ava turned to face him, a sudden rush of warmth flooding her chest at his words. He wasn't just saying that to ease her fears. She could tell by the weight of his voice, by the sincerity in his eyes. She could feel the cracks in her defenses forming, the wall she had built around herself over the years starting to crumble with every word he said. But she couldn't allow herself to lean on him. Not yet. Not when everything around them was so uncertain. "I know," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. I just feel like there's so much more to this than we understand. And if we don't figure it out, we're both in danger. This whole thing, Harbor, could be much bigger than we think." Elias's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened, and she saw the flicker of something darker behind his eyes. "You're right," he said, his voice steady but edged with something deeper. "But we're in this together, and we'll handle it together." His words settled into her like a promise, but it also filled her with dread, because she knew, deep down, that together wasn't just about working through the project or the threats they were facing. It was about something more personal, something that would tie them together in ways they hadn't yet explored. And that scared her. The car made another turn, and they were soon pulling up in front of her apartment building. Elias slowed the car to a stop and shifted it into park. The rain outside seemed to intensify, the sky now roaring with thunder. Ava looked out the window, unsure of how to end the evening. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "You'll be okay," he said quietly, his voice filled with something soft, but firm. He didn't wait for a reply as he reached over and gently touched her arm, just enough to feel the warmth of her skin under his fingertips. His touch lingered for a moment longer than it should have. Ava felt the electric charge between them, the subtle but undeniable tension that had been building for days. She met his gaze, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw something there, something more than just concern, something deeper, more personal. But before she could read it, he pulled his hand away and opened the door. "Good night, Ava," he said, the words gentle, but there was a weight behind them, a promise. She nodded slowly, feeling her heart beat harder than before. "Good night, Elias." She stepped out of the car and into the rain, the cold droplets kissing her skin, but they didn't feel as harsh now. Something about the night had shifted. Something had changed between them, and she couldn't deny it. As she walked toward her building, her mind raced. But there was a strange comfort in the chaos. She knew the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. But tonight, for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. When she reached the door, she paused, turning back for a moment to look at the car. Elias hadn't driven off yet. He was still sitting there, watching her. His face was illuminated by the headlights, his gaze fixed on her as if waiting for something, waiting for her to understand what had been left unsaid. She held his gaze for a moment, then stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. The night had changed everything, but it was only the beginning. The next morning, Ava walked into the office with a heavy heart. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than usual, a low buzz that mirrored her thoughts. The silence of the office, usually comforting, now felt oppressive. As she settled into her chair and turned on her laptop, a new email appeared in Elias's inbox. The subject line caught her attention immediately. "You don't know how much your past is threatening you." There was no signature, no hint of who it was from, just the unsettling words staring back at her. Ava hesitated, unsure whether to show it to Elias right away or to try to brush it off. But something about the message gnawed at her, and she knew it would linger until she addressed it. Without another thought, she opened it. The words were a subtle threat, vague enough to be unsettling, but specific enough to make her wonder who would send such a message and why now. She sent it to Elias, her fingers trembling just slightly as she hit send. She didn't even have time to question her decision before his reply came back almost instantly. "I'll be there soon. Stay where you are." Ava closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The past, her past. Elias's past was never truly gone. It had always lingered in the shadows. Only now, it felt as if it was coming back to claim them both. Minutes later, Elias entered the office. His face, as always, was a study of control. But the sharpness in his eyes betrayed the tension beneath. He walked straight to the desk where Ava sat and leaned over her chair, his presence enough to fill the room. "Did you read the email?" he asked, his voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. Ava nodded, handing him her phone. "I didn't know what to make of it. It's a vague threat, but it's not vague." Elias cut her off, his fingers tightening around the phone. "It's from someone who knows more about me than they should." He paused, his eyes darkening as the weight of the words settled between them. Ava could see it now, the ghost of a past he had tried to outrun, a shadow creeping back into his life. The confidence he always wore like armor faltered, just for a moment. But it was enough for her to notice. "There's someone," Elias continued, his voice quieter now, almost to himself. "Someone I used to trust, a former business partner. He betrayed me a long time ago, and I thought he was gone, but I was wrong." Ava leaned forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. What does this have to do with Harbor? Why now? Elias exhaled sharply, frustration and something deeper in his expression. "Because he's involved in the contracts I've been trying to untangle. This project, this whole damn thing is a mess of lies and hidden motives, and he's right at the center of it." Ava felt a chill settle in her chest. It wasn't just a business problem anymore. It was personal. And the way Elias's shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched, told her this wasn't the first time this man had caused him pain. It was as though the weight of the betrayal still lingered, a wound that hadn't fully healed. They spent the next few hours digging through the Harbor files, the search taking them deeper into the project's murky financial history. Ava had expected the usual discrepancies: missing receipts, questionable bids, things that could be explained away. But this was different. Contracts that had been altered, vendor payments made twice, invoices with duplicate numbers. There were clear signs of corruption. But it wasn't just random fraud. It was systematic, methodical. The ghost from Elias's past had embedded himself deep within the project, ensuring that whatever they uncovered would lead them straight to him. At one point, Ava froze, her eyes scanning the latest document. "Elias, look at this." She handed him the paper, her pulse quickening. It was a payment to a company that didn't exist, at least not anymore. A company connected to the man he had spoken of. Elias's face hardened as he examined it. "He's still pulling the strings. I should have known." Ava could hear the regret in his voice, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his armor. She wasn't sure why it affected her so much. Maybe it was the way he spoke, the weight of the past that still had him in its grip. She had seen him face countless problems without flinching. But this was different. This was personal. Before she could say anything, Elias stepped closer, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder, an instinctive gesture of comfort. Or perhaps protection. She hadn't expected it, and the warmth of his touch sent a strange jolt through her, a mix of vulnerability and something deeper, more intense. "Don't worry," he said, his voice low but firm. "I won't let him do this to us, to you." For a moment, She simply stood there, her breath caught. There was something in his words, in the way he looked at her, that made her chest tighten. In all the chaos, in all the uncertainty, she hadn't realized just how much she had come to rely on him. It was more than just professional respect. Now it was something stronger, something undeniable, and she didn't know how to navigate it. Elias's gaze lingered on her for a heartbeat longer than necessary, his eyes searching hers, as if he was trying to find something answers. Maybe. Or the same thing she was struggling to name. The silence between them stretched, charged with the weight of everything unsaid. Then, without warning, he stepped back, pulling his hand away as if the touch had meant more than either of them had expected. "We need to deal with this," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "This isn't just about Harbor anymore. This is about stopping him before it gets worse." Ava nodded. But inside, a knot tightened. She had come to care for Elias, more than she was willing to admit to herself. But the deeper she got involved with him, the more dangerous it became. She could feel the lines between work and personal blurring, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and more digging into the finances. They both knew that what they were uncovering was only the tip of the iceberg. Each piece they pulled apart revealed something more unsettling, proof that they were dealing with a web of lies that went deeper than they could have imagined. As the day turned into night, the storm outside had not yet passed. The rain lashed against the windows, the sound of it filling the silence in the office. Ava couldn't focus anymore. Her mind kept returning to Elias and the raw vulnerability she had seen in him earlier. She stood up and walked to the window, gazing out into the storm. The world beyond seemed as chaotic as the one inside her mind. The past, the present, and the uncertainty of the future all collided in a storm she couldn't control. Ava pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She could still feel the lingering pressure of Elias's hand on her shoulder, the weight of his words. But what did that mean for them? What would it mean when the dust settled? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her phone, a new message from an unknown number. "This won't end well. You can't outrun your past. Elias." Her stomach twisted. It was a reminder, a threat. Ava's fingers trembled as she set the phone down. The message wasn't just about Elias anymore. It was about both of them. And suddenly, the stakes felt higher, far higher than either of them had expected. She looked over at Elias, who was still at his desk, his back to her. His face was drawn, his expression focused. But there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. Ava took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was coming next. Whatever they had started, whatever bond they had begun to form, it was going to be tested now by the ghosts of the past and the choices they would have to make. The glow of the computer screen was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across Ava's face as she leaned closer to the desk. It was well past midnight. The office was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of the rain against the windows and the soft hum of the air conditioning. She had been at this for hours, digging through the Harbor Project's records, trying to make sense of the tangled mess Elias had been warning her about. Her eyes were heavy, the fatigue from long days spent piecing together clues finally catching up to her. But then, there it was, a discrepancy, a detail so small, so easily overlooked, that it could have slipped through the cracks unnoticed. But Ava wasn't the type to miss the small things, and when she looked closer, her heart skipped. The safety expenditure funds earmarked for construction safety protocols had been doubled in multiple invoices. The contractors' numbers were off, and some of the vendors listed didn't even exist. The files weren't just poorly managed, they were deliberately altered. The fraud wasn't just internal corruption, it threatened everything the project had been built on. The very foundation of the community they were trying to save. Ava felt her stomach twist. This wasn't just a business problem anymore. The stakes had risen, and it felt like someone was playing a dangerous game. She turned around to call Elias, but before she could, he appeared in the doorway. He had been in his office, no doubt aware of the late hours, but now, his presence felt heavier than usual. There was an edge to his posture, a wariness in his expression that made her pause. "Find something?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an undertone of urgency. Ava nodded, but she didn't immediately show him the screen. She was processing it all, trying to make sense of how deep the deception went. Finally, she turned the laptop toward him. "There are multiple discrepancies. Safety costs have been inflated. Some vendors are charging for work they didn't do. And there's a trail of fake invoices." Elias leaned in, scanning the data, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, as if looking for something he had missed. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear on his face. "This isn't just bad accounting." "Ava," he murmured, his voice lower now, tinged with disbelief. "This goes all the way to the top. Whoever is behind this has been carefully covering their tracks." Ava watched him, her gaze flickering to the intense concentration in his eyes. Despite the alarm bells ringing in her head, she couldn't ignore the magnetism of the moment, the way his frustration mirrored her own. But there was something else there, something that made her heart race, in ways that had nothing to do with the files in front of them. She took a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts aside. There was too much at stake to let emotions cloud her judgment. But she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened every time he looked at her. Elias wasn't just the man she had been working with. He was something else entirely. As the night deepened, they continued their search, working side by side. Ava felt the quiet tension between them grow with every shared glance and each brush of their hands as they passed documents back and forth. Their collaboration had always been professional. But tonight, there was something else in the air, a connection that neither of them had fully acknowledged, but couldn't ignore. At one point, Elias stood behind her as she scrolled through yet another set of invoices. His presence was a warm weight on her back. She could feel the heat of his body close to hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing mixing with the pounding rain outside. She wasn't sure if he noticed how close they had become physically and emotionally, but Ava couldn't ignore it. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight as she pointed to a name on the document. "This company. It was flagged in the past for falsifying documents." Elias leaned in, his hand brushing against hers as he moved the mouse to click on the name. The contact was brief, but electrifying. Ava's breath caught in her throat, and for a second, everything around them seemed to fade. The files, the project, the city outside, none of it mattered. It was just the two of them in that moment, surrounded by the truth they were unearthing. He didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze lingered on her hand, then met her eyes. There was a flicker of something in his expression, something unspoken. They both knew it. The air between them was charged, like the storm outside, electric and heavy. "What do you think this means?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't just mean the file. She meant everything, the tension, the connection, the way she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them. Elias hesitated. "It means we're not just fighting corruption anymore," he said slowly, his voice low, raw. "We're up against a system built on lies, and we've been drawn into it, whether we like it or not. We're in the middle of something far bigger than us." His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the danger they were facing. But Ava couldn't help the pull she felt toward him. There was something about the way he spoke, how his gaze softened, despite the chaos around them, that made her heart skip. The truth they had uncovered tonight was nothing compared to the truth they were beginning to see in each other. This wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about Harbor. This was personal. She knew it as well as he did. Ava turned away, clearing her throat, trying to focus on the task at hand. But the heat of his presence was still with her, lingering in the space between them. Elias took a step back, his eyes never leaving her. We need to get to the bottom of this. But Ava, he paused, searching her face. This isn't just about the project anymore. It's about us. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew what he meant. She had felt it too, that unspoken bond that had been forming between them, tightening with each passing hour. But this wasn't the time to address it. Not when everything was unraveling so quickly. We'll deal with it, she said, her voice steady, even though inside, her mind was in turmoil. Together. He nodded, but his expression remained conflicted. I need you to trust me, he said quietly. We can't back down now. I do trust you, she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. But we have to be careful. There's no going back once we dig any deeper. The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of what was to come. They were no longer just colleagues, they were allies, caught in something bigger than either of them had imagined. The night wore on, and the rain continued to pour. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the office, everything felt still. Ava found herself staring at the files, but her thoughts were far away. She didn't know what to expect from Elias, or from herself. But one thing was certain, they had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. As the clock ticked past 2 in the morning, the tension between them hadn't subsided. It only seemed to grow. The feeling that something was shifting, something beyond the project, beyond the fraud, something more dangerous. When Elias finally stood to leave, he looked at her with an unreadable expression. I'll stay on top of this, he said, his voice softer than before. But whatever happens, we stick together, right? Ava met his gaze, her heart beating faster. Right, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And as Elias stepped into the elevator, leaving her alone in the quiet office, Ava realized just how much she had come to rely on him, and just how much she had started to care. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. The storm was far from over, and the truth they had uncovered was just the beginning. The weekend was quiet at Reed Horizons. The usual hum of the office had faded, leaving only the soft clicking of Ava's keyboard and the faint rustle of papers. It was just her and Elias now, a rare moment of solitude amidst the chaos they had been caught in. The desk was cluttered with documents, contracts, invoices, the remnants of a project that was quickly slipping out of control. The files had begun to blur into one long, never-ending list of discrepancies. But despite the chaos, Ava's focus was sharp. It had to be. But something had shifted between them since the night of the storm, the night they had spent together, unraveling the mysteries of Harbor. She could feel it in the space between them, in the way their conversations now carried a weight that hadn't been there before. There were things left unsaid, things that neither of them wanted to acknowledge, but couldn't ignore. Ava glanced up, her fingers frozen over the keyboard as Elias approached her desk. He wasn't carrying any new files, just his usual calm, his usual quiet presence. But there was something different about him today. His shoulders were slightly tense, his usually composed face betraying a hint of something she couldn't quite place, but could feel. Deep down, in the air between them. He stopped beside her, looking at the document she had just finished reviewing. His gaze lingered there for a moment before he spoke. "Ava," he said, his voice softer than usual. "There's something I need to say." Ava's heart skipped. His words, though simple, held a weight that made her sit up straighter. She turned toward him, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elias looked at her, his expression not quite guarded, but not entirely open either. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. After a beat, he let out a long, controlled breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice a little unsteady now. "I'm worried, not just about the project, but about you, about Leo, and about—" His voice trailed off, as if the words were difficult for him to put together. Ava's breath hitched, her pulse quickening at the vulnerability she heard in his voice. The Elias she had come to know was always in control, calm, distant, focused. But this was something different. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. She hadn't expected him to admit this, hadn't expected him to open up in such a raw way. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice softer now, unsure whether she was more concerned or moved. She found herself staring at him, her heart racing, suddenly hyper-aware of the distance between them. It wasn't just the project anymore. There was more. So much more. Elias hesitated for a moment longer, then finally spoke, his voice quieter, more personal. "I'm not just worried about what's happening here, Ava. I'm worried about you, about everything you're carrying. I can't stop thinking about it. About you. I care about you." His words hung in the air between them, raw and unfiltered. There was no bravado, no shield of authority, just the truth spilling out. Ava felt her chest tighten, her thoughts suddenly a swirl of confusion. "This is happening," she thought, her heart pounding against her ribs. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had known, deep down, that something was shifting between them. But to hear him say it, to hear him say he cared about her, left her speechless. She opened her mouth, unsure of what to say, unsure if she could even find the words. Her head was spinning. But then, the floodgates of her own emotions opened. She swallowed hard, trying to hold herself together. "Elias." She paused, unsure of how to continue. Her voice was shaky, but she couldn't keep quiet anymore. I feel the same, but I didn't want to admit it. Not yet. Not with everything going on." She bit her lip, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. "I've been trying to keep things professional, but it's harder than I thought. I don't just depend on you for the work. I depend on you for something else too." The words were out before she could stop them, and the vulnerability in her voice startled her. She hadn't planned to say that. Not like that. But there it was, hanging between them. Elias took a step closer, the intensity of his gaze never leaving hers. "Ava," he said, his voice low and raw. "We don't have to pretend. Not anymore. We're in this together. Whatever happens next, we face it together." His words resonated deeply in her, a promise wrapped in the rawness of his emotions. She had never seen him like this vulnerable, open, uncertain. But she could feel the sincerity in his words, and it was enough. Ava took a deep breath, her heart racing. She felt her resolve falter. The walls she had built around herself starting to crumble. There was no turning back from this. No way to undo the moment. The tension, the unspoken feelings, it was all out in the open now. And she didn't want to hide from it anymore. Slowly, she stood up, closing the distance between them. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out, gently touching his arm, just above his sleeve. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what we're getting into. But—" She took another breath, her eyes meeting his. "I don't want to be scared anymore. Not with you." Elias's expression softened, his hand moving to rest on hers. The warmth of his touch grounding her in that moment. "Then we'll face it. All of it. Together." The air between them was thick with unsaid promises. Everything around them seemed to fade away: the project, the dangers, the uncertainties. All that remained was the connection between them, the pull of something undeniable, something stronger than either of them could explain. For a moment, they stood there, suspended in the quiet of the office. The only sound, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the city outside. The rain continued to tap against the windows, the world outside as stormy as their hearts felt. But in that moment, there was a sense of calm, a sense of shared understanding. Elias leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "I don't know what happens next, Ava," he murmured, his voice filled with quiet sincerity. "But I know I want you by my side." Ava's heart fluttered at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that whatever came next, they could face it together. She smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Then let's see where this takes us." And with that, the last of the barriers between them fell away. The professional boundaries they had carefully maintained for so long no longer mattered. What they had started, this partnership, this bond, had become something far more powerful than either of them had ever anticipated. Elias's hand gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing over her skin. And in that moment, Ava realized that no matter what dangers lay ahead, they had something even more valuable than the truth they had been chasing. They had each other. A week had passed since their first confession, since everything between them had changed. Ava had hoped the silence between them in the office would mean a return to normalcy. But there was nothing normal about what they had uncovered, and nothing simple about what was happening between them. But there was something more pressing that had been lingering on her mind: the constant threat, the ever-present danger to Harbor, and now to her family. It was just after dusk when she arrived home, tired, her thoughts heavy with the burden of the project and everything it entailed. She had just taken off her coat when she noticed the small package waiting for her on the kitchen counter. There was no return address, no clue as to who had sent it, just the feeling of being watched. Her breath caught in her throat as she ripped open the brown wrapping paper, revealing a single photograph of Leo, his small face smiling, unaware of the danger creeping into their lives. She turned the photo over, feeling the paper rustle in her fingers as she read the cold, impersonal message scrawled on the back. "Touch the project again, and your son won't be safe." Her heart stopped. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the cold, paralyzing fear that gripped her chest. Her hands shook as she set the photo down, the weight of the words settling deep within her. The danger wasn't just in the project now. It was personal, and it was real. Ava's first instinct was to go straight to Elias. But before she could even think to dial his number, the doorbell rang. She jumped, her pulse hammering in her ears as she stepped cautiously to the door. When she opened it, Elias stood there, his expression unreadable but sharp with concern. "I knew you'd be here soon," she whispered, stepping aside to let him in. Without a word, he entered, his eyes scanning the room before falling on the photo on the counter. He didn't need to ask. The look on her face said everything. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice calm, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper in it, a protective intensity she hadn't heard before. His usual calm demeanor was still there, but there was an edge to his voice that Ava hadn't expected. This wasn't just business anymore. He was afraid. Ava shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this, Elias. We've crossed a line. And now it's not just us. It's Leo, too. If they hurt him." Her breath caught in her throat, and she had to stop herself from breaking down. Elias stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently pull her into his arms. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. The warmth of his body, the steadiness of his presence, was enough. It calmed her, grounded her in that moment when everything felt like it was slipping away. "You're not alone in this," he said softly, his voice so close to her ear that she could feel the weight of the words settle deep into her chest. "I won't let anything happen to you or Leo. I promise." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear those words. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, as the weight of the situation pressed in around them. There was no escape from this anymore. The danger was real, and the risk was something neither of them could avoid. "We have to move fast," Elias said, stepping back, his face hardening. "We need to figure out who's behind this before they get any closer. You'll stay here with Leo while I handle the rest." Ava shook her head again, more firmly this time. "No, I'm not hiding while you're out there fighting. We're in this together, remember?" She wiped her eyes quickly, trying to regain some composure. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." Elias studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. She could see the internal battle playing out, in his eyes the desire to protect her, to keep her safe from everything, but also the knowledge that they couldn't face this alone. "I can't risk losing you, Ava," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. His hand brushed against hers. Just a fleeting touch, but it carried so much meaning. "You and Leo, you're everything." Ava's heart clenched at the rawness in his words. "And you're mine," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She felt the vulnerability in the air between them, but there was something else, too, a strength, a shared resolve. Elias leaned in slightly, his gaze intense as his eyes met hers. For a moment, it felt like time stopped, the world outside fading away until there was only the two of them, standing in the silence between them. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "But there are sacrifices to be made. Ava, I'm not going to pretend I can protect you from everything, but I'll fight for you. I'll fight for us." Ava swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep within her. They were no longer just fighting for a project. They were fighting for their lives, their safety, their future. But at what cost? The days that followed were filled with frantic activity. Elias used every contact, every connection, to track down the source of the threat. But no matter how many people he spoke to, every lead seemed to circle back to the same shadowy figure from his past, someone who had always been lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The investigation brought them closer together, closer than they had ever been before. Each night, after they had spent hours digging through files, After they had discussed strategies and reviewed the evidence, they would sit in silence, their shoulders touching, the warmth of each other's presence more comforting than any words could be. But the danger was growing. They knew it. And as much as they tried to ignore it, the strain of their situation was starting to show. The lines between their professional relationship and their personal feelings were blurring, and neither of them knew where to draw the line anymore. One night, they found themselves face to face with a man from Harland Company, a key player in the web of corruption they were trying to expose. He had shown up at their office, unannounced. His presence a threat in itself. Elias had been the first to move, his body tense and ready. But Ava was the one who stepped forward. Her eyes locked on the man, her voice steady as she called his bluff. As the confrontation reached its boiling point, Elias placed a hand on Ava's shoulder, pulling her back toward him. She hadn't even noticed the danger creeping up on her. But Elias had, and in that moment, she realized something deep and undeniable. They were a team. Their connection wasn't just emotional. It was a bond forged in the fires of danger, of shared trust and understanding. If anything happens to her, Elias's voice was low, a warning that rang through the room. I'll make sure it's the last mistake you ever make. The man hesitated, sensing the danger, before backing off. The room fell silent, but Ava's heart was racing. The way Elias had spoken, the way he had positioned himself between her and the threat, it wasn't just about protection. It was about something much deeper, a commitment. When the man left, the office seemed to exhale, the tension finally lifting. But it wasn't over. Elias turned to Ava, his face still hard but softer now, the line of his jaw unclenching just slightly. We'll face this together, no matter what it costs. Ava reached out, her hand resting on his arm. We'll do it, together. And in that moment, the world outside seemed less daunting. The storm wasn't over, but together, they had something stronger than just survival. They had trust, and that, she realized, was the most powerful weapon they could wield. A week had passed since the night of danger, when everything between them had changed. The tension between Ava and Elias had grown more palpable with each passing day. Their unspoken bond had solidified in the quiet hours spent working together. Their mutual respect growing into something deeper, more intimate. Yet beneath their shared commitment to Harbor and the project, there was a storm of uncertainty brewing, one that neither of them was willing to confront until now. Elias sat in his office at Reed Horizons, his phone pressed against his ear, the lines of his face drawn tight. The voice on the other end was cold, formal, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to holding power, used to making decisions that affected lives. We would like to extend an offer, Mr. Reed, the voice said, to return as CEO of Reed Horizons. Your leadership is essential for the next phase of our growth. Elias's fingers clenched the edge of his desk, the words sinking in, though he had known they were coming. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to reclaim the position he had once held with so much control, to restore the power he had lost. But with that power came an unbearable choice. He hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had always thought of himself as someone who could handle everything business, power, the pressure of being at the top. But now, sitting in this office, surrounded by the legacy of Reed Horizons, he realized something that had eluded him for so long. He wasn't just fighting for a company anymore. He was fighting for something else, something that he couldn't ignore any longer. Later that afternoon, Elias called Ava. When she answered, her voice was a mix of concern and curiosity, but there was an underlying tension in her words that told him everything he needed to know. She was already feeling it, the weight of what was coming. I have something to tell you, he began, his voice quieter than usual. Ava could sense it, the shift, the gravity in his words, even before he spoke. What is it? She asked, her voice soft, yet filled with an unspoken understanding. He paused for a moment, his words hanging in the air, but he couldn't delay it any longer. I've been offered the CEO position at Reed Horizons again, he said, his voice steady, though it betrayed a hint of the conflict he was feeling. It's a huge opportunity, Ava, a chance to take back control, but it comes with a cost. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to ask the question. She already knew. She could feel it in the way his words had faltered, in the weight of the decision he was about to make. If you take it, she started, her voice trembling slightly. If you go back to that world, you won't be here with me. You won't be part of Harbor. You won't be. She stopped herself, her eyes closing as the truth settled heavily in her chest. You won't be part of us. Elias didn't speak right away. He couldn't. The truth of her words, her unspoken fears, hung in the air between them. The choices were clear, but the consequences were anything but. His heart was torn in two, torn between the responsibility he had to Harbor and to the community they had worked so hard to build, and the pull of the power he had once known so well. I don't want to leave you, Ava, Elias finally said, his voice low, raw. But this opportunity, it's everything I've worked for. It's my career. It's my legacy. I can't just walk away from that. Ava's chest tightened. She had seen this side of him before, the side that was driven by ambition, the side that believed his success defined him. And though she understood his need to reclaim that part of himself, it hurt. It hurt because it meant a part of him, perhaps the most important part, would always be a world away from her. I know it's important to you, Ava said quietly, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside her. But what about us? What about this? We've built something here. Elias. A life. A future. You can't just walk away from that. Elias's gaze softened as he looked at her through the screen of the video call, his face etched with the weight of the decision. He didn't want to walk away from her. He couldn't. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice low, vulnerable. I've spent my whole life chasing power, chasing success. But this is different. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose this. But I also can't lose what I've worked for. Ava felt a pang in her chest. The internal struggle was evident in his eyes, but she knew what she had to say. She couldn't let him make this decision alone. She couldn't let him sacrifice their future for something that might never bring him the happiness he was searching for. You don't have to choose between us, she said, her voice steady and firm. You don't have to lose yourself or your career. But you have to decide what matters more. The power, or the people you care about. The world you're trying to fix, or the one you already have. Elias looked at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for answers he wasn't sure he could find. But in that moment, he knew. He knew what mattered most. I don't want to lose you, he said softly, stepping closer to the screen. I don't want to lose this. Ava smiled, a bittersweet smile that spoke of all the things they had yet to say. Then don't. We'll figure it out together. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Elias continued to manage the internal struggle, while Ava worked relentlessly on the harbor project. The stakes were higher now than ever before. They were no longer just fighting for the community they had built. They were fighting for each other, for a future they weren't sure they could secure. But in the midst of the tension, something unexpected happened. A key ally, someone they had not anticipated, came forward with crucial evidence that shifted the balance in their favor. It was a break they had desperately needed. With this new information, they could finally strike a blow against Harlan and the people behind the corruption. The news was a victory, but it was bittersweet. They had won, but they had also lost so much along the way. The emotional toll had taken its toll on both of them. A few days later, Elias stood on the rooftop of the harbor project, looking out at the skyline. The city stretched before him, its lights twinkling like stars. The skyline a testament to progress. The project was finally coming to life, but it was more than just a building. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. Ava joined him, her hand finding his as they stood together, looking out at the horizon. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Elias squeezed her hand, a sense of peace settling over him. "Yes, we did." For the first time in a long time, Elias felt a sense of clarity. The choice he had made wasn't about power. It wasn't about control. It was about love, about commitment, about finding strength in something deeper than ambition. He turned to Ava, his gaze softening. "This is where I belong. With you, with Harbor." Ava smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. They had chosen each other, not as individuals seeking power, but as partners facing the world together. "Together," she said, her voice steady. And in that moment, they knew the world was still full of challenges, still full of uncertainties. But they had each other, and that was all they needed to face whatever came next. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, breaking through the remnants of the storm. The rain had finally relented, and the world outside seemed to shimmer in the soft morning glow. The harbor district, once a vision of ambition and promise, now stood as a testament to their efforts. Families had begun moving into their new homes, the sounds of children's laughter filling the air, mixing with the scent of freshly cut wood and wet paint. It was a place reborn, a place where hope had been planted in the very soil beneath their feet. Ava stood on the balcony, looking out over the scene before her. The list of tasks still to complete in her hand felt like a distant concern. The weight of the work had lifted, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a lightness in her chest, a peace that had eluded her since the first day of the project. She had fought so hard for this moment, for this place, for these people. And now, standing at the edge of this new beginning, she could finally see it all come to life. The soft sound of footsteps behind her pulled her from her thoughts. Elias stepped up beside her, his coat draped casually over his shoulders, his presence warm against the cool morning air. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. His gaze, too, was fixed on the scene below. But there was something more in it, something that reflected the quiet pride he felt in everything they had accomplished. "We did it," he said, his voice low but full of sincerity. There was no hint of boastfulness, just a simple statement of truth. Ava smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet joy that she had never known before. "Not just us," she said, her eyes scanning the families walking by, the workers finishing their tasks. "Everyone. Every single person here has contributed. It's not just our victory." His hand found hers, and they stood together, silently taking in the view. There was a peace in this moment, in this shared understanding, that neither of them had ever felt before. They had been through so much danger, betrayal, uncertainty, but they had made it. And as she felt Elias's fingers entwine with hers, Ava realized just how much this journey had changed her. Not just the project, not just the city, it was everything that had brought them together. Everything that had made them stronger. They walked together through the harbor, the newly paved streets still glistening from the rain. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly in the early morning quiet, a rhythm of unity, of shared purpose. Ava could feel the weight of the past few months in each step they took. But more than that, she could feel the pull of something else, the quiet promise of the future. They passed by the homes now occupied by families who had once been strangers to them, now part of the fabric of this place. As they walked, Ava looked around, seeing the transformation that had taken place, not just in the buildings, but in the people. There was a sense of belonging here now, a sense of ownership, of care. The love they had poured into this project was visible in every corner of this district, in every smile and every hand raised in gratitude. This was more than a development. It was a community. For a moment, the world felt still. The worries, the dangers that had once seemed so large, now felt like distant echoes. The heavy burden they had carried together was no longer a weight, but a memory. This place, this new world they had built, was a symbol of everything they had overcome. But as the wind shifted and the sun rose higher, a vibration in Ava's pocket broke the silence. She pulled out her phone, her heart sinking when she saw the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. She opened the message, feeling the words wash over her like a cold wave. Harbor was only phase 1. A chill ran through her. Despite the warmth of the morning, the message was simple, cryptic, and laced with an unmistakable threat. Ava looked up at Elias, her expression unreadable for a moment. He had already read the message, and his grip on her hand tightened instinctively, the tension in his body palpable. He didn't need to say anything. She knew the weight of the message. They both did. Ava exhaled slowly, her breath coming out in a cloud, and turned to Elias. "We've known this day would come, haven't we?" she said, her voice steady but filled with a depth of emotion she hadn't anticipated. Elias didn't answer immediately. He squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on the skyline, as if looking for something out there, something beyond the words in the message. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "We've faced worse," he said softly. "We've learned to fight, and we've learned to trust each other. Whatever this is, we'll handle it, together." Ava nodded, feeling the familiar warmth of his hand in hers, grounding her, reminding her that she was no longer facing this alone. The message had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her. They had come too far. She had come too far. Ava took a deep breath and looked out across the district again. The city was awakening around them, the streets alive with the hum of a new day. It was as though the storm had passed, leaving only the fresh, clean air of possibility. She couldn't let fear cloud this moment. She wouldn't. "We're ready," she said, her voice firm, as she turned to Elias, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "We'll face whatever's coming, together." The tension between them shifted, not easing, but solidifying into something unbreakable. The past, the threats, the shadows, the danger would always be there, just as they had always been. But it no longer mattered. They had faced it all before, and they would face it again. And this time, they would face it together. They stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the world they had built, a future unfolding before them. The horizon was wide, the possibilities endless. And in that moment, as the rain clouds parted and the first rays of sunlight broke through, Ava knew that no matter what came next, they would stand side by side, unshaken by whatever storm might rise, because together they had already weathered the hardest part, the end.